I think it's helpful to think about AI as the great enabler. There are AI-driven code generation systems right now, AI-generated image generation, text generation, and so you don't have to be an expert to be able to do tech work.
Today on the Daily Scoop podcast from the Scoop News Group, a final interview with GSA's Ann Lewis. She talks AI, Login.gov, and much more. It's Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. Welcome to the Daily Scoop podcast, where you'll hear the latest news and trends facing government leaders. I'm the host of the Daily Scoop podcast, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for joining me. All right, let's get into today's top headlines. The new director of the Defense Department's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, is scheduled to meet with lawmakers in closed-door and open sessions Tuesday to discuss his organization's activities investigating unidentified anomalous phenomena that have raised national security concerns. The hearing with the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities comes on the heels of the release of the Pentagon's fiscal 2024 Consolidated Annual Report on UAP, the modern term for UFOs and mysterious transmedium objects. AARO leader John Kozlowski told FedScoop and other reporters last week that his organization has received over 1,600 UAP reports to date, stating that officials have, quote, taking meaningful steps to improve data collection and retention, bolster sensor development, effectively triage UAP reports, and reduce the stigma of reporting a UAP event. In other news, restrictive software licensing practices are impacting multiple federal agencies in the form of cost increases and limited choices of cloud service providers or cloud architecture, according to the Government Accountability Office. The Department of Justice, NASA, Department of Transportation, and the Department of Veterans Affairs all told the GAO that as a result of restrictive practices in software licensing, the agencies either experienced or expected cost increases in acquisition, infrastructure, and licensing. The Social Security Administration, NASA, and DOJ each identified issues that involve their choice of CSP or architecture as a result of the practice. The GAO said in its report that those agencies have taken specific actions that may have limited their exposure to potential impacts from restrictive practices, including establishing enterprise-wide cloud contracts with multiple service providers. For more news at the intersection of the federal government and technology, visit FedScoop.com. After serving as the head of the Technology Transformation Services at GSA for the past 2 years, Ann Lewis recently announced that she is stepping down from that role. Lewis led the TTS organization during a time of major AI adoption across government, workforce transformation, and a greater focus on spreading use of the agency's Login.gov single sign-on platform. Now, in a final interview with FedScoop reporter Caroline Nyhill, Lewis discusses those priorities for TTS going forward, as well as her journey into government now that she's stepping away. Let's go now to that interview with GSA's Ann Lewis.
My name is Caroline Nyhill. I'm a reporter with FedScoop. I cover a lot of technology-related stuff for the federal government, and I'm here with the very talented, very accomplished Ann Lewis, who's the director of the GSA's Technology Transformation Services.
Hi, Carolyn. It's so great to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here. So, first and foremost, I'm going to ask about you. First of all, loving this cherry red, like lost cherry Tom Ford look. Slang.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I went to, okay, so funny story. I'm really bad at fashion. I don't understand clothes at all as a technologist and computer scientist, but I have to go to Congress later today.
Oh.
And I was like, I need to buy a real grown-up suit. And so I asked, and my favorite AI system, help. I'm a technologist who doesn't know about fashion. What should I do? And it told me to go to this one particular department store, ask for a personal stylist, and tell them to find me an outfit. And I did that, and it worked, and I got an outfit in 2 hours and didn't have to worry about it. So,
wow.
Fashion accomplishment here.
And technology. We're bridging it. I used to be a fashion reporter.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And so that's like super cool for me to hear. That is so interesting. I mean, like, I think we can maybe start there of like, what are your thoughts right now about AI, about artificial intelligence, and where the federal government is at with AI, especially within the GSA's perspective?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we're facing an opportunity and also a challenge with bringing emerging technologies like artificial intelligence into government. And so it's a really exciting time to be in government. AI is already here. It's already changing the way that we work. It's changing our economy. It's changing the way that our world works. And so I think one really important question that policymakers and implementation leaders are grappling with is how do we proactively engage with change and find ways to pragmatically bring in, test, and adopt new technologies in ways that are safe, that are accountable to the public, that actually work for government. And so I think that this is something that we're discussing at a lot of different levels right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I wanted to take a step back and go to my previous question before I asked about AI. That was a question I was really excited to ask.
Sure.
I'm gonna jump the gun here. But you've had this extensive experience. You started working for companies like Amazon and Rosetta Stone. I stalked your LinkedIn.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. And you moved over to the government fairly recently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what was the draw? You said you went to Carnegie Mellon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you studied computer science.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, first and foremost, what was the draw to industry? Was government even an option when you first graduated?
So I don't think I knew about government opportunities right when I first graduated. I was graduating right at the end of the .com bubble.
This is
the
eGov?
Yeah, many bubbles ago. And so I was just trying to get a job and landed at Amazon. But over the last 20 years, I was a software engineer for about 10 years and then got into management kind of begrudgingly. I didn't really want to do it because I really like coding. I really like problem solving. But then when I finally tried it, I realized that it's when you do that work and you're managing engineers and you've previously been an engineer, then the people who are working for you, you actually understand what they're doing. You can really appreciate them and give them the support they need. And you can create the conditions for 10 or 20 or 200 or 700 people to be successful. And that's really rewarding. Just because I really care about setting up people for success. But it's also a different kind of problem solving, at a different level, but it still kind of resonates with what originally drew me to computer science. But after about 15 years in industry, I was really hungry for work that I felt was in line with my values.
Sure.
You can get paid a lot in the tech world, but the company that's employing you is making more off of you than they are paying you. Otherwise, they wouldn't be employing you. And so it's clear that the work we do is valuable. But if it's so valuable, I want to point that energy and that opportunity and that value in the direction of something I really care about. And I really, really care about things like government benefits and the social safety net of the United States. And I think it's a really exciting idea that government can make good on its promise to the public of delivering all these benefits and services. There's a lot of challenges with the way that works right now, but instead of experiencing broken government services and being frustrated about it, I wanted to really be in there and helping fix things.
Yeah. Well, that's super inspiring. And I know that's your story, thankfully, is your perspectives is something that's shared among other government technologists where they're I worked in industry and then I realized that I could also help be the change.
Yeah.
Which is so cool.
So cool.
It's so slay.
You can wake up every morning and be proud of what you do, even if it's a lot of meetings and it's kind of annoying and there's a lot of bureaucracy. You're I'm helping. I'm doing something I really care about.
Yeah. Is this the spiel that you give technologists who are where you join the government? I mean, there's a huge AI talent surge happening right now. I wanted to ask about it. What are your words of wisdom and what is your approach to people who are in college or looking to join things like the U.S. Digital Corps or, U.S. Digital Service?
Mm-hmm. Consider government as a career path. There are a lot of opportunities right now. There's more job stability in government than there is in industry. But I think the thing that really sells me is the mission and the impact that you can have. So waking up every day and being proud of your work, that's a big deal. That's something that's kind of more of a rare experience in the tech industry. But also government scale is really big. Everything you work on is going to touch millions of people, sometimes billions of dollars. And so in terms of like building your career and getting lots of good experience, depending on where you land in like the private sector, you might work for a startup and have a big role, but in a small project that may or may not make it, sometimes for reasons you can't control. Or if you go to work for a really big company, you might have a really small role in some bigger picture, which again, there's a lot of like important, rewarding work to do there. But in government, you always have a really big role on something really big. And so like even a medium-sized project in government maybe involves millions of people, hundreds of millions of dollars, and you will be at the table making decisions about that in a really direct way. So it's like a great way to get big experience.
It makes me think of, have you listened to Hamilton before?
Ask me how many times I've listened to Hamilton.
How many times have you listened to Hamilton?
Maybe 150. I still have most of it memorized. We could sing right now if you want.
Oh my gosh, I'm not warmed up. I've had dairy. We have matcha here. But so like it's like very much the room where it happens.
Yeah, you can be in the room where it happens. Wow, thank you for that setup. That was really good.
I love that song. I listen to that all the time when I'm on my way to Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I think about it a lot too. Yeah.
Right? So, you know, speaking of the U.S. Digital Corps, speaking of which, you know, I know that largely they're focused on AI-related projects. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on adding AI and AI-enabling staff specifically to the GSA? I mean, like, you look over technology transformation services. I'm really wanting to hear, like, your perspective.
Yeah, it's something that we were trying to work on before the AI executive order, but the AI executive order has really made it a priority and it sort of brought everyone together. And so we've been really proud to be able to deliver on some of the AI talent and hiring work that's called out in the AI executive order. And so we've hired a new artificial intelligence cohort into both the U.S. Digital Corps and Presidential Innovation Fellows programs. And initially, when we first listed the application for that, we were like, well, all these AI people are going to be in such demand. Will they actually want to work for government? And we got thousands of applications for a small number of fellowship roles, thousands. And then so when we welcomed the new cohort, I got to meet both the Presidential Innovation Fellows and U.S. Digital Corps cohorts, which is like the best part of my job, you know, welcoming people and thanking them for their service. And they were so excited about the work that they're doing. They're working on so many interesting projects across so many use cases across so many agencies right now. And so they're already diving right in. And I think that that's just, you know, it's one small example of how we can build AI capacity in government. We can hire people with data science skills or direct experience in artificial intelligence or in AI enabling fields. But a lot of software engineers and data scientists already in government are kind of training up on AI right now because there's so much to learn and there are new breakthroughs every week. And so we're seeing a lot of that happening. And then we're also seeing a lot of people across government getting together in the communities of the Centers of Excellence's AI community of practice.
Yeah.
Thousands of people already working in government are joining the communities of practice and showing up for meetings and teaching each other about AI use cases and best practices and trying to figure out what's going to work best for their agencies. So that's really exciting as well.
Wow. So it sounds like a very like individualized lessons learned approach.
Yeah.
Which is
cool. I mean, there's some things that are going to be the same across all agencies, but yeah, we're really proud of the work that the artificial intelligence community of practice is doing because it's bringing in government workers at all levels and providing space for collaboration. The AI community of practice at TTS has also expanded its annual artificial intelligence training program. So there was one training program last year in partnership with Stanford, and this year we have 3 tracks on technology, leadership, and procurement. And the registrants who are participating in this training program this year is over 11,000. So there are a lot of people who are interested. The training material is really, really good. And anyone with a .gov or .mil address can join. That's
pretty incredible. I was going to ask you about that because I both looked at that link and then was sent by that link by the one Billy Mitchell.
Nice.
An amazing shout out. What a great editor. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, you know, specifically like in this training program, you know, for some government employees, this will be the first time that they're, it could be the first time that they're venturing into this kind of training. Probably not, but, and what are like the main points that you think are important for like government workers to be aware of within AI? Like things like, I guess, highlights to be aware of and to know as they're doing their work with AI. Like they might not be like a master coder, but like what do they need to be aware of and able to do coming right out of the gate?
So I think it's helpful to think about AI as the great enabler. There are AI-driven code generation systems right now, AI-generated image generation, text generation. And so you don't have to be an expert to be able to do tech work, although I know that there's definitely a lot of like barriers in the tech world based on tech culture that have in the past prevented people from kind of like feeling like they could ask questions or could get their hands dirty or get into the details. But with AI assisted tools now, you can ask your favorite AI system to explain to you how anything works or to help you build something or to recommend next steps. And so I think AI is going to be able to, or generative AI in particular, enable people to get more into problem spaces and work that they might have previously been intimidated about. So I'm hoping that's something that everyone can harness and explore and figure out how to make work for them.
Do you have an idea of like where artificial intelligence is needed next within the agency?
Yeah, I mean, so we're doing a lot of piloting, and specifically GSA IT is running a great set of internal pilots on collaboration tools.
Sure.
And so we're trying to think both internally and externally. And TTS's role is typically working more externally on public-facing websites and tools, and also working together with agencies.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, looking outward and kind of seeing what agencies are doing, I think anything that involves taking a whole lot of data and trying to make decisions about it. Like I think USDA is doing some work on using AI to figure out how to look at pictures of meat and do meat grading, for example, which used to be a manual process and now is something that you can get a lot of like interesting metadata back, and AI can sort of assist a human in making decisions. But I think the critical thing that example shows is that AI can be a big assist to a process that's run by people. And so AI is already like making things like that a lot more easy and automatable, but AI can't decide what's correct or fair. That's something that we need to give it a lot of input into and design processes around that also have like human gates and human like checks.
Any upcoming pilots within TTS or GSA that you know about that you could share about?
I mean, a lot of our work is at this point in the administration was started earlier in the year and is ongoing. So we're continuing to implement the directives in the AI executive order. Yeah. And, the FedRAMP program launched an emerging technologies framework that's going to help us figure out how to best get emerging technologies like AI and the companies that provide those services into government in ways that work for government agencies.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Yeah, I was very in tune to when the FedRAMP memo came out. I talked to Drew and Eric more than Drew Michaelgard and Eric Mill.
Nice.
All the time.
Oh, that's great.
They were always on stage with microphones. And that was a lot of fun. I know they're still doing roadshows, but I also know that they're doing an emerging tech portion of FedRAMP. How do you think that's going to affect how government agencies are able to employ AI, especially from an outside contractor, now that it could be FedRAMP authorized?
Yeah, I think it's going to help government agencies figure out how to deal with the proliferation of solutions and services in the cloud service provider marketplace.
Sure.
And I think that's a lot of how AI is going to enter government is through vendor contracts. And in general, when I think about government and tech implementation, it's a really big set of public-private partnerships. So you're always going to have industry playing a critical role in providing innovative technology and sometimes teams to do different kinds of work. But it's also just as important for agencies to have people in agencies who understand technology, who understand artificial intelligence, who can guide the process and make sure that the work done is aligned to user-centered outcomes and goals that are accountable to the public. Absolutely.
And do you think that will kind of get both public and private industry? I know that largely, I know that there is like some push and pull as to where the private industry is for AI use and AI models and operating. But do you think that this will maybe kind of assist in both the government and industry being on the same page for how to responsibly and safely use artificial intelligence? Because then it's a draw. You can work with the federal government, except you have to be FedRAMP authorized.
Right. Well, agencies can make their own decisions on how to run their ATO processes, and we hope that FedRAMP will be a pivotal part of that. But I think, like, to your broader point, it's that the public-private partnership aspect of this is really critical. And, you know, the government, the public sector, and the private sector are always going to have different incentives. People and systems respond to incentives, and so the private sector is going to try and grow market share and make a profit, and the public sector, our incentives are aligned around delivering services to the American public and being accountable to the public. So I think being able to find pragmatic ways of marrying up those incentive systems is the key to successful implementation in general, and but in particular to successful adoption of AI-based tools. So, like, AI is already doing useful and interesting things that impact the mechanics of governing. But we are already, like, dealing with risks of things like hallucinations, algorithmic bias that amplifies human biases. And I think there's, like, a big opportunity for government to work with companies to help prioritize things like bias testing and governance and, you know, being open and transparent about model benchmarks and such. So I think that, like, we can make some magic happen by working together.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, I also know that, like, data is a huge part of that. So I was wondering if you can talk about, like, you know, I know that GSA is doing a ton with AI and doing a ton with technology always. I know because I cover it.
Thank you for talking to us all the time.
Always. Thank you for answering my emails. Thank you for never once getting mad when I'm like, also, I have more questions.
Love it.
You know, that's me. But, you know, I wanted to ask, for those external facing, services, you know, things like Login.gov that's using facial matching technology. You know, I wanted to ask, could you provide us an update on how that's going, since I know the pilot is now, like, months in?
Yeah. So the pilot is on track. And so in this pilot, we're providing an enhanced identity verification service that includes, like you mentioned, facial matching, also expanded in-person identity verification options through a partnership with the United States Postal Service. And, you know, we're getting lots of really interesting, useful data, and we are on track in terms of our the plans and deadlines that we published in the Login roadmap. I also just want to shout out that Login rolled out a fourth language, Chinese, joining English, Spanish, and French as a part of its language access plan.
That's really interesting. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Was that, like, kind of, like, targeted to be like, you know, we also need to include Chinese? Yeah,
all of our programs at TTS are trying to prioritize accessibility, user research, and language access. And so individual programs will take a look at their user base and take a look at people who come to their websites. And sometimes, since Login.gov is a front door for many other government agencies and programs, the user demographics and the breadth of who uses the system will vary from agency to agency and program to program. But sometimes we'll identify a need, like, oh, you know, this Chinese language needs to go next because there's a whole sector of users who would benefit from that. We try to be really thoughtful with translation and localization in general. And it's not just take the text on the page and translate it to another language. It's thinking holistically about what are the needs of people who are coming to this website, and how can we accommodate those needs, and how can we test our assumptions there so we know for sure that we're meeting user needs.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And you said the pilot's going well. I know that there was an equity team on board for Login.gov's piloting of facial recognition technology of biometric validation. Are they still on board?
These are two separate teams that are managed independently, actually. So the Login.gov team is doing the identity verification pilot right now, and then a fully separate team, different management structure, different reporting cadence, et cetera, is working on the equity study to assess different facial matching algorithms, like the state of the algorithms, and that's a partnership with an academic partner.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, so that work is also ongoing.
Oh, wow. And do you know that I realized that I started to ask a question about data earlier and I didn't finish it?
Oh yeah, what's your data question?
Oh my God. My data question is, how do you approach GSA obviously has like from Login.gov and USA.gov. Like USA.gov is huge. So, I mean, like how is GSA managing all of that data? Also, you guys house data.gov, which to my knowledge, and what was it, 3 or 4 employees?
Yeah.
That was the best email I've ever received. Which, also a huge project that's coming out with some new metrics, or has already come out with some new metrics for public use. But I wanted to ask, from your perspective as director, how has GSA kind of buffed up its data governance to approach so many different emerging technologies and also, keep on modernizing through like any legacy systems and stuff like that?
Yeah, harnessing the power of your data, even when it's stored in many places, is going to be a key to successful implementation of any artificial intelligence technologies and tools, because those tools are only as powerful as the data that you put in them. Yeah. So within TTS, and I think broadly across GSA, when you have individual programs that have ways in which they interact with users, every time you have a user interaction, you're storing and retrieving data. And so individual systems will have their own databases. And then sometimes you need to think about like an enterprise data strategy and figure out how to bring pools of data together. Sometimes we try and drive broad adoption of tools like DAP, the Digital Analytics Program at GSA, where any government agency can adopt this tool and start sending behavioral data back to a shared analytics portal that then we can use to look across government and get government-wide data insights. Yeah. And so there are many different pieces of the puzzle here with data. So it's like an enterprise data challenge across government to figure out, when do you bring data together and how do you do that and what are the best practices for that? And I think that government is all over the place in terms of maturity for that. Like within GSA, there are still mainframes that like critical like acquisitions or building data lives in. And so you need to think about pragmatic ways of like, if you try and do like a big data migration, you'll spend years waiting for it to be done and maybe not have business value for a while. But there are ways that you can break up those really big modernization tasks into small pieces. There are tech industry best practices you can apply, like wrapping APIs around a system that previously didn't have them, so that other system components that want to use that data have a way to get access to it that works for that other system's owner. And so we're thinking about all of these different tools and tactics, and then trying to apply how we arrange and organize our data in the context of what value do we want to provide to the public. It's also really easy from like a software engineering perspective to try and build new shiny things because they're fun and we like them, but it's, you could spend all the hours that you have left in your life building new shiny things. And so we try and really focus, what are we doing with data around what are our users' needs and how can we serve the public?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask, what are your like main priorities for public facing government services, things like USA.gov and Login.gov and data.gov, it's all the .govs. I wanted to know, like, is there anything that you're specifically focusing on right now where you're like, everything needs to like meet this standard?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately what I want for TTS is to pragmatically bring best practices from the tech world into government in ways that actually work for government. So a lot of different agencies have experienced this dynamic where you bring in tech folks who tell them, here's the modern way of doing things. The way that you're doing things doesn't actually work. And then you don't really see impact or change or adoption because you haven't bridged those communication gaps. And so I think it's on technologists who have experience from other places to bring in new ideas and offer them up, but act as thought partners to the program leaders that they work with, who've the civil servants who've been there for a while, and they understand, here are the decades of policy that led to what we have right now, and here are the budget constraints and the political conditions that led to the system being shaped this way. And it's actually a big challenge. Like, have you heard of something called Conway's Law?
No, tell me more.
Okay, it's this thing that it comes up in a lot of like tech industry conferences, and it basically means you ship your org chart, or rather that like the shape of your organization and the way that people interact within it ends up showing up in the way that your product is structured. So like, for example, there's like this running joke in the tech industry where if you have two people who don't like each other who are in charge of like the data warehouse or something, you'll end up having two data warehouses with teams that aren't allowed to talk to each other and really complicated data syncing strategies between them that ends up making everything else more complicated. But in government, I think that the way that budget and decision-making authority flow down from Congress and from the executive office of the president into agencies creates a lot of really complicated structure that you just have to deal with if you're a technologist. That's like Conway's law at government scale. And so I think if technology leaders can first learn that structure, learn the history, talk to the civil servants who know all the things and are kind of the unsung heroes of government, and then figure out, okay, here are some options of ways to work together. Here are some ways of describing the problem you want to solve that vendors can understand. Here are some ways of structuring goals, and bring in ideas like working iteratively.
Yeah.
It's possible to throw, hey, build this website over the wall to an implementation team and then come back a year later and discover millions or hundreds of millions or sometimes even billions of dollars have been spent building the wrong thing because nobody checked assumptions. And so you can adjust processes in just like subtle ways to get wildly better, cheaper, more effective outcomes by bringing in the practices of human-centered design, which I think is a big important theme across TTS and across government tech right now, where instead of guessing what the users might need, first you identify who are you serving, who's your audience. How can we talk to them? How can we get feedback from them? And then you define your goals in terms of user-centered outcomes. And then before anybody spends any money building anything, you check with those users. Hey, would this solve your problem? And you can create like low-cost prototypes. And honestly, I think the cost of prototyping with AI-based code generation tools is going to go to zero pretty quickly. It's getting easier and easier to prototype. So you show users prototypes and you're like, okay, here's the system that you're using right now. What if it worked this way? And then you get your feedback, you get their feedback, and you test your assumptions about what are actually the problems or barriers. And then you do that a few times until you have a clearer idea of what you need to do, and then work starts. But then you check with users again every couple of weeks until you're done with the project. Sounds super simple, super obvious, but running implementation programs like this can drastically increase the success of outcomes and drastically drive down budget and risk and implementation resource utilization. So it's really like a huge idea. It's an idea that I think could save the government $1 billion.
Wow. So I think that's it for us. This has been the Daily Scoop. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you so much, and we will see you guys soon.
For more on GSA's tech transformation, visit FedScoop.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Daily Scoop podcast, available on all podcast platforms. If you've already rated the podcast on your platform of choice, thanks so much. High ratings and good reviews of the show help more people to find it. The Daily Scoop podcast is a production of the Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Adam Butler and Carlin Fisher help put the show together, and the entire Scoop News Group team contributes. We'll be back tomorrow with more top headlines. Until then, I'm your host, Billy Mitchell. Thanks so much for listening.